The notes? I hope so. Okay. I'm very conscious that the basic model of curriculum design that we looked at yesterday will be very familiar to some of you, perhaps less familiar to others. But it was worth, I hope, just going through that because it's a model that can, it's not the only model, but it's one that can be adjusted, used in different ways. And I just thought that it would be good for us this morning to have a quick look, very quick look, at some alternative and innovative types of programs. But almost every curriculum model would begin, or probably should begin, with a situation analysis, looking at the context, looking at the needs, and formulating some kinds of objectives. And it's beyond that point then that the design often goes in different directions. And I've noted down a few things here. It depends, of course, what we're looking for. Some programs aim primarily to train pastors, others to train everybody in the church. Others have a focus on Sunday school teachers, youth workers, evangelists, missionaries, So all of those needs would lead to somewhat different programs. There are a number of possible models that can be used, and many more than I've listed here, and some of you will know of other models. First of all, of course, there's a traditional Western curriculum, typically used in many Bible schools, many TE programs, so I'm not going to go through that again. You know the sort of things that go into a typical Western-style traditional curriculum. Some different models include, for example, what we might call a contextual thematic curriculum. One college that has used this quite a lot is the United Church in Papua New Guinea, in their Rorongo College, where their approach to meeting the needs and the learning objectives creates courses that are quite different to those in a traditional curriculum. Some of the examples I'll give you are from colleges, because they can still be used in extension or other methods. And the contextual thematic curriculum picks up important biblical themes and important contextual themes and builds the curriculum that way. And a lot of the topics from traditional curricula are covered, but they're organised in different ways. Sometimes it's useful to think of an analogy of a pie or a cake. There are many different ways in which you could cut it and distribute pieces. And so there are many different ways to organise the content of a curriculum. In this approach, just as a quick example, the first year first of all has preparation for study. Then there's a strong theme on practical Christianity, developing a strong personal devotional life, principles of Christian living in the particular country and culture, Christian family, and so on. And then some overviews to put other material in context, an overview of church history, of doctrine, and so on, and the Bible. And in the second year, the major theme is Christians and the church. So there's an introductory year, then there's Christians in the church. So what does that cover? A theology of the church, study of Bible passages related to the church, theology of mission and the missionary calling of the church, theology and practice of worship, history of the world church, and so on. So a number of the same topics we might cover, but organised around ecclesiology and the life and practice of the church, and all the way through practical and biblical or theological together, always keeping the practical and the spiritual emphasis there. A lot of work on practical ministry and so on. And their third year, they've looked at Christian citizenship in their cultural context. So and the whole context. And it was great to hear Frida's working out of the totality of context, looking at so many issues that I think are really important and which sometimes we forget when we define our context. And so there's a whole year in this topic. It's just one way of doing it. It could be done in other ways. But how do we relate as Christians to others in our culture? A lot of biblical study comes in, evangelism. How do we evaluate our own cultural background from a biblical perspective, and so on? So that's, in a very brief form, one model, and responsibilities of a Christian as a citizen of the country, and so on. A contextual spiral curriculum is somewhat different, but if you know the concept of a spiral, it goes like a corkscrew, like this, round and round. And spiral curricula are used in secular colleges as well, and it's quite interesting. The idea there is that you begin with a broad overview of the most important Christian teachings, and then gradually develop them more deeply, in more detail, so that students study in many of the same areas each year, but they keep reviewing and building on what they've learned before and going deeper and higher. And for those of you familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, going up that to some extent and bringing in deeper aspects of learning, not simply memorizing. That's very important. And I think one approach to a spiral curriculum has been to get people to think about what are, say, about 6 absolutely fundamental principles. Could you reduce basic Christian theology to, say, 6 points and statements? That might be quite hard to do. It has been done with some other disciplines. And then, how do we unpack that and develop it and build it into a spiral curriculum? I'm sorry that we don't have time to explain these in any depth, but just an awareness of what's possible, perhaps. A case study curriculum is another interesting way. It's used a lot in teaching medicine, business, law, subjects like that. And it can be used to train pastors, Christian leaders, and so on. A highly contextualized and practical approach, and if it's done well, it can produce very good results, but it needs some serious work to develop. Usually, as I see it, you need some general overview subjects as well as just case studies to pull things together. I think it's probably actually a bit difficult to build an entire curriculum with case studies, but I would recommend using them in a number of subjects or context areas, because it helps people to really relate the biblical teaching to the kinds of issues that they are facing. And ethics obviously leads itself well to a case study approach. I've done it often with church history and related that to the future, to the present rather, and so on. There are many ways to use case studies. They can be quite long and complicated. They can be as short as a case written out on a file card. They can be presented in a series of slides or a little bit of video, or just with one cartoon with some speech balloons. Now discuss how you are going to, what you're going to put in the other speech balloon. How are they going to react to this situation? There's lots of ways to present case studies. I'd just like to say a little bit more about a modular curriculum, because this is a very interesting one developed by the conservative Baptists in Honduras in Central America. In the early days, it's been around a long time. Some of you may have seen this. It's sometimes called the obedience-oriented curriculum. In this case, it is designed specifically for a culture where the church is growing rapidly. I think you could redesign it for other sorts of contexts, but that's their fortunate context. And it's also, in this case, for people with a low literacy level, but that could also be changed. And it's very interesting because what they are doing is writing very short, small, practical courses as needs arise. So instead of a huge, long book, you can have a small course, and there is a preferred sequence which relates to building a church. So the students might first of all do a little booklet on how to share your faith with others. And in their case, the assignment is always practical. So it doesn't say write an essay on evangelism. It says, using this book, this little booklet, go and share your faith with at least 3 other people this week and come back and tell us how you got on. So very practical. And it builds through the stages to you have enough people who wish to start a new church. How are we going to do that? There's a little booklet on organising leaders and elders or whatever for the church. Simple model. There's a little booklet on baptism and what it means. The assignment does not say go and baptize 3 people. You can't always do that. But it will have something practical about explaining to the people in your church plant what baptism means, and if appropriate, have a baptism, and so on. So it goes through. There's another one on giving, Christian giving, and lots of other practical things for building a church. I believe you could have a more sophisticated course of the same kind. I don't know if anybody is doing it, but it's possible. And one of the strengths of the course is that it can respond easily to immediate needs. So suppose that the Jehovah's Witnesses are coming to town and creating problems. You don't have to say, well, sorry, we don't do the false cults course until the year after next, or it's not written yet, and in the meantime you lose half your people to the Jehovah's Witnesses. No good. So with this approach, a short, simple course can be written, and they hit multiple targets in the one course. So they would have a teaching on the Trinity, which is important for reaching Jehovah's Witnesses, and a few other things. So there's a response to immediate needs. There's also a degree of individualization, so that this person, this student, has some different needs to that one. And the course, with the little short modules, a week's work each, allows that sort of flexibility. So it's a very interesting model, which I think deserves to be studied and used more. Some of you will be familiar with that already. That's one of the more interesting ones. Another interesting model is a contract curriculum. And one example of this was in a college. It could be done fairly well with TE, I think. It was done in a college where they had to change the curriculum because they had a student revolt. If you have a student revolt, you decide that maybe you had better do something. And hopefully none of us will have that reason for changing. And this is a BTH program, but contract learning is quite a common concept in education. So what you are doing, or what they did, is to look at each student's needs, each individual student's background and ministry goals. And then they would give them credit, what we call RPL, recognition of past or prior learning. They have learned X, Y, and Z, so they don't need to do that again. They've had a lot of experience preaching, so let's count that towards their degree. But what are the gaps? What things haven't they learned? What things do they need to do? And so each student would take some of the courses on offer, would get recognition of prior learning for other things, and for their own particular ministry needs, they can work out a contract. That is, they sit down with the facilitators and work out a program. What will I read? What will I study? Perhaps I'm going to do it with my wife or husband or somebody else together, and we're going to, in effect, sign a contract that this semester we're going to do this reading, that practical work, this written work, whatever. And you just have to have some resources available for them to do that. And the students need to be at the point where they can take care of their own learning to some extent. But lots of us have students who could do that. And so you don't always have to run a complete TE course for everything if you use a contract model, and especially in more sophisticated areas where people have internet access and so on. I think there's a lot that could be developed there. Contract learning has been used all the way through school systems. Even kindergarten children can do it if it's done right, and all the way, of course, to individual guided studies that a lot of colleges have, and so on. So it's an interesting one. Just quickly, an onion curriculum with various layers. This is one that we developed together, a number of us in New Guinea. But then they had too many staff changes and it was difficult to implement it properly. But this is circles within circles. So first of all, study of the personal devotional life, then Christian family life, each circle getting bigger, church life, and all the things, all the necessary biblical material, theological study, practical, built into each one. Then this was a curriculum for lay people, not for pastors. So the Christian life in the workplace, Christian life in the community, what does that mean? The Christian as a citizen of his or her nation, what does that mean? Evaluating and enjoying our culture in a Christian framework, and then finally becoming a world Christian with a global perspective. So all the way from personal life, family, church, and so on, community, up to being a world Christian, a global perspective. And lots of traditional teaching in of all of that, but just a different focus. And finally, and there are many others, some of you will be familiar with Perry Shaw's work, and some of you will know that better than I do, so I'm not going to say a lot about it, but I have just called it a multidimensional holistic curriculum. And he's given some suggestions there to help integrate the different aspects of study and to keep everything very practical and emphasize spiritual, practical and knowledge. And we all try to do that, but the program of the Arab Baptist Seminary in Beirut has really tried to do that very seriously. And I think we're better placed to do it in TE because our people are in their own church settings. They're not removed to some place far away, and we don't have to develop false sort of ministry settings. They're in their own setting, so it's a good place. I just draw your attention briefly, in finishing here, to the little diagram, if you can read it, on transfer. This is such a critical concept. Transfer in education of any sort is vital, but it is often difficult to attain. What do we mean by that? First of all, from theory or theology to practice. We can teach students a lot of information, but if it doesn't affect their lives, well, it's nice to have a head full of Bible knowledge, but it's supposed to transform our lives, and our ministries. Often the language of instruction may be different to the language that the student will minister in, or to evangelize other people. Often the context of the teaching or the learning is different to the context of life and ministry. How do you transfer from giving people general principles? How do you get them to transfer to individual cases? You've got a general principle. Now you need to apply it in this case or that case. That's transfer. And they learn about one particular case. How do you transfer the knowledge to a different case? And so on. How do you draw general principles from particular cases? Research suggests that even the best and the brightest in universities often have great trouble transferring what they learn in their classes to real life and practice. So this is a critical thing for us. And Perry Shaw has suggested some ways for doing that, and there are a lot more that I didn't have room here. But I do want to draw your attention just to the critical importance of transfer in our teaching and learning, and how can we help that to happen. Okay, so thank you.